Well, we've recently been in this wonderful epistle of Philippians where we're learning what does it mean to live a lifestyle that's worthy of the gospel, whether we're in problems, whether we have issues, whether we're in prison like Paul. And as we know in chapter 1, Paul's in prison, but he says, hey, the gospel's not bound. And you know what? This is great. Even though I'm in chains, it's all good. Paul has a positive attitude because he realizes that what's really important is that people hear the gospel. Then we turn to chapter 2 to realize what really is the underpinning of this, and it's the life of Jesus. The fact that Jesus gave himself to others, Paul says we ought to consider others better than ourselves. Then he gives us great examples of Paul and Timothy and Epaphroditus, these great men of honor, he calls them, that truly love others. Well, then in chapter 3, Paul turns and he shows us practically what it means to be someone who follows Christ and is willing to give it all up. He talks about himself. He says, this is what I used to be. I used to be an incredible Pharisee. I used to be these things. He lists all these accomplishments that he had. But what does he say? He says, I count them all loss because what I really want to know is Jesus. He says, I want to know him in the power of his resurrection, and I want to know him in the fellowship of his sufferings. Paul says, I'm willing to lay everything aside because at the end of chapter 3, he shows us that we're citizens of heaven. And the way that we live in the cities that we live in is absolutely imperative for the proclamation of the gospel. Howard Hendricks once coined the phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Paul realizes that the way that we live out the gospel matters when we proclaim the good news. Would you take a moment today and would you ask God to strip you of whatever it is that you need to be stripped of? God, strip me of anything that would keep me from being someone that could proclaim the gospel. Let me count all things as loss. The only thing that I want to know is Jesus, and I want to make sure that the gospel goes forth in a life that's worthy of the manner of the gospel.